All right, a very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you very much for joining this episode. I think it's episode 4 now of the One Hub series with Standard Bank, and today we're going to be talking about ethical sourcing. Um, Really excited to have Justin Dillon on. This is actually the reason we've had to set it a little bit later than normal. Justin's very kindly got up a bit earlier than he perhaps wanted to, is dialing in from San Francisco. Is that right? San Francisco, Justin?
The Bay Area, yes.
And then more closely up here in Joburg, we've got Joel, myself up in Joburg as well. So, as always, we'll kick off. I'll ask a few questions. We'll get some backstories. We'll start digging into the detail about what exactly ethical sourcing is, why we should be interested about it, what's happening, why companies are starting to adopt it, or maybe they're not, and what actually we can see happening both from a company and a profit perspective and a global perspective in terms of the objectives. So I'm looking forward to going through all that. I've got loads of questions. This is the bit where I'm asking the audience, though, please, I want to hear your questions. I want to get you involved because actually this is your session. And one of the reasons we want you to get on is to actually go and pose these to Justin. I'll do my best to moderate those as we go through this. So without further ado, let's just kick off. Justin, a very warm welcome. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm just going to ask a question. How did you get into ethical sourcing? Let's start with a very simple question. Or maybe it's
Uh,
not.
yeah, I don't know if that was the dream in high school. That was not, I don't think I ever pointed my life to it. I think I fell into ethical sourcing. I think anyone who uses that term probably fell into it through multiple different stages. The company I run now, Freedom FRDM, is a supply chain risk and transparency platform. So we help companies see what's going on in their supply chains, address risk primarily initially around forced labor and increasingly around ESG risk factors, help them see those risks and act on it. And at the very heart of who I am, I've kind of always been a movement builder. I love seeing movements happen. I've had the privilege of getting to be a part of anti-trafficking movement over the last 10 years. I haven't worked in that space over 5 years, but 10 years ago, 12 years ago, working with the White House and United Nations and getting to build campaigns, digital campaigns around awareness and action around human trafficking. And it was through that work that I saw one particular campaign that we did was a campaign called Slavery Footprint. We did this with the Obama administration, and Google funded it as well. And it was essentially an online survey that could help you determine as a consumer how many slaves it takes to run your life. We're pretty sure the world didn't ever get that question, and we thought it would be interesting, and the government funded that question. And we built this really beautiful survey at slaveryfootprint.org that was basically a lifestyle survey, and had no idea if anyone would show up. We launched it, I think, end of 2011 with the hope of maybe getting 150,000 people over a year's time to want to know the answer to that question. And about 150,000 people showed up in the first hour. And today, over 30 million consumers know the answer to that question all around the world. So that told me, that was the data that I needed to say there's something going on here in the space, ethical sourcing. You can't ethically purchase anything without ethical sourcing. And I want to say that again. There is no ethical purchasing without ethical sourcing. There's no ethical buying without ethical supply chains. And currently our supply chains are so opaque. And as we know from the pandemic, we know how broken they are. The number one job to be able to build a world that I think is in line with all of our values is to start organizing and optimizing and building transparency into supply chains. And so that's why we started our company.
When you started it, I mean, it's very purpose driven. We're going to come back to purpose. Did you think that there was a business there as well, or did you imagine this as a charity? You hope to get donor funding to move it forward?
At the time we started it, I was running a charity, and so I knew how to do that. And and charities have a purpose, an incredible purpose in the world, and I got to live inside that world. I think that the existence of charities requires society to believe that there's a problem that only charities can solve, and that is true. We need charities to solve certain problems. If you want to solve systemic and structural problems, you're going to need systemic and structural solutions. And government can play a role and has played a role here and there. But really, this is where the marketplace and business gets to play roles. Sometimes, and I think it's the ultimate test of whether or not something is going to, should exist or not. The market is your report card. It tells you if it should work. So when I started going around Silicon Valley and Sand Hill Road here in San Francisco or south of San Francisco to the venture capitalists and saying, I've got this idea about supply chain transparency and all the rest of it, everyone knew my background and, kind of nodded their head and said, I heard like really awful terms like, well, that's really noble. And what a good thing to do, which are just like fingernails on a chalkboard. You're like, I'm not doing this to be noble. I think there's a real problem to solve. It's like, well, it sounds like you're selling a vitamin and not a medicine. And we fund medicine. We like to get behind things that are medicinal, things that people have to use. And so 5 years ago, when I was going around starting the company, it probably felt a little bit more vitamin, even though we were a C Corp and all the rest of it. It has increasingly become medicinal, and we can get more into that.
Yeah, and I want to go back to 2017, but let's also assure people on the call that you've been quite successful since 2017, and therefore it's worth listening to the story. And then we'll bring Joel in. So fast forward now to date, how successful has Freedom been with numbers of customers and impact that you're actually having?
Well, we're still learning how to measure success. Obviously, we've got our financial measurements, which is, just all of that's reported to our team and our board. But we also have, success with our customers. Who are we working with, right? Getting to work with Standard Chartered Bank is a mark of success for us. Why? Because that's a huge network, and we see immense opportunities there. Getting to work with IBM. Both as a partner and as a customer of ours. These are big. Boeing, Coca-Cola. These are all big signatures of success. I would argue we prefer to think that we have a philosophy that our customers are the heroes, and we think that anyone that comes to work with us, they're our people, they're our tribe. They want to. That is a signal that these are companies that are intellectually curious and wanting to solve problems at scale. I often get the question of, well, what about the companies who don't care? I'm like, I don't know. I don't meet them. They never knock on our door. The companies that care and actually want to do things are showing up, and that's an immense honor, an immense privilege. So success in that way is as a startup, we're getting to work with some of the biggest companies, governments, you name it, in the world. So that's success. I think the success that gets me most excited is, my background is I've been making things ever since I was a kid and sharing them with the world. And I've had the privilege of getting to make all kinds of things. Getting to make software, enterprise software, which is definitely the hardest thing I've ever made, and watching people use it and get value out of that. And even push back and say, I wish it did this. One of the best and hardest conversations we hear is when our customers go, oh, I wish it did this. It doesn't do this. It almost sounds like disappointment. But what it is it's telling us they really want to solve a problem. And at the moment, maybe our software doesn't do that. We're hearing a lot of companies say, I wish I could map my entire supply chain with one software. Spoiler alert, doesn't exist. Don't let anybody tell you that their AI-powered software can do that. It's not true. It will be one day, but we're not there yet. No one's there yet. But it's exciting to me to think, going back 5 years ago, no one was saying that. No one was saying, oh, I wish we could map our entire supply chain. I want to address scope 3 emissions in my supply chain. I want to make sure that we're managing water and waste, or looking for upstream sanctions and connections to parts of the world that we can't do business with. Those questions weren't happening 5 years ago. So for me, one of the marks of success is when customers say, I want it to do this. That means they're engaged and we're getting somewhere.
One of your biggest partners in financial services, I'm guessing, is Standard Bank.
Absolutely.
And they must be opening up opportunities across Africa. Perhaps Joel will bring you in before we go in and understand a bit more about actually how this partnership is working. How did you meet Justin, and what was it that effectively made you get off your chair to go out and have the conversations and go and find these sorts of people? This is very non-banking behavior, by the way.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. And a few years ago, as we were trying to figure out how we as Standard Bank could help our corporate clients along their digital journey, we started investigating different ways we could bring value into them. And one of the biggest gaps we have in Africa is how we start thinking about data and how we start thinking about transparency in viewing supply chains and who we're actually working with and who we're partnering along this business journey, if you will. And I was watching CNN the one evening. It was actually during the US elections, the last US elections. And there was an ad of Freedom that came up, and Justin was talking about some work that they were doing in Ghana. So I reached out to Justin, told him what we were trying to do. We set up a meeting, and we quickly found that there was a meeting of minds. So you mentioned purpose earlier. The first kickoff point for us that we had an alignment of purpose. We both wanted to make some impact in how we were helping African businesses. And off the back of that, we started working together and seeing how we could integrate Freedom into our One Hub offering as Standard Bank Group. And it's been a successful journey since then. We've been doing quite a lot together, experimenting together. Justin mentions, we have clients coming to him and asking him, we'd like you to do this and that. I think in the beginning, he would have looked at me as that pestering client, but I think, Justin, we've done quite a lot of interesting things, and we've opened up different ways in which we can start engaging clients, particularly across Africa. When we start thinking about the gaps we have in data, how can we think about utilizing a solution like Freedom to start creating that transparency? So we have small businesses in the middle of Ghana showcasing that they are complying with global taxonomies, and they can indeed be good business partners for big multinationals looking to come into Africa and do business.
Joel, you said something which I find fascinating. You saw Justin on CNN or CNBC or some massive broadcaster doing amazing things. You just picked up the phone and phoned him, basically. What gave you the guts and the courage? Because I find that so interesting. So few people will actually do that. They block themselves. They don't have the attitude or the gumption to actually get out and go and make that phone call, because they assume they won't get through, and it's obviously they don't want. How did you overcome that and actually just feel that your call would be taken?
I think it was a lot of different incentives. So firstly, for us wanting to get out there and do something different in the markets we play in, it needs us to partner. As Standard Bank, yeah. It requires us to partner with people who are out there. So Freedom is a good example of that. And we'll never get to partner with them unless we take that leap of faith and trust that if we do make that call, either he'll pick up the phone and respond, or nothing will happen. So it's a win-win for me. He picked up the call. Here we are a couple of years later and trying to do a lot more good together. On the other side, if he didn't, I suppose I'll be looking for someone else to partner along this journey. So it was just something I had to do to try and continue building out our value add into our client base.
So that's very cool. Something for other companies and leadership teams to think about, how to inspire their staff to go and actually get out of their chairs. Justin, then you've got this random call coming in from this guy that you've never heard of in Africa while you're busy doing 1,001 other things in America. Why did you take the call?
For all those reasons. Why would someone call me from a bank? I mean, that's you piqued my interest. What it tells me, when I talk about companies that join us, and the only people that reach out are the ones that are really intellectually curious and passionate. Of course, I'm going to take that call. I got a few calls from that era of CNN. For some reason, they happen to be running our story at one of the times in which most people watching CNN ever in the world during the elections. So it was fortuitous, but getting to meet Joel and hearing what he's trying to do. I love meeting entrepreneurs. I love entrepreneurs, but I think entrepreneurs have such a different muscle group of being, and that I don't have. I don't have what Joel has. I don't have the ability to operate and ideate inside, which is arguably a very fixed structure. So Joel's having to create new worlds inside of a very fixed world. I don't have those muscle groups. So of course I was looking for opportunities for Freedom, but also just selfishly trying to learn from Joel.
All right, let's understand then a bit more about what the product actually does, and then we can start thinking about what progress is made in how it's actually solving things. Justin, can you just tell me what it does, and why an organization should think about implementing it? Because it's not free, and there's a reasonable amount of work to actually go and put the product in.
Yeah, I think the best way to explain it is if everyone here uses financial software either for their businesses or personally. You put data in, information in about what you're doing in the world, what you're buying, and that software is going to tell you what your account is, where the risks are. It could do all kinds of different things with the inputs that you're putting in. Freedom is very similar to that. A little bit more elegant in terms of what it's going to tell you, but essentially, our customers tell Freedom, our software, what they're buying. They're telling who they're buying from, where those companies are, very, very basic invoice level data, just like you would inside of a financial software. And from that, Freedom's able to create insights into risk into their supply chain by, in some cases, we've got technologies that can map the genomics of risk in a particular product, meaning we create a predictive bill of materials on the thing that you're buying. Or we can map upstream suppliers, in some cases, all the way to raw materials, or look for any adverse media reports. So when you're thinking about, for the folks that work in the financial sector, I'm sure many will here, it's very similar to a KYC, but in our case, it's more of a KYS, know your supplier. So a company will drop in 5,000, 10,000 suppliers that they buy from into Freedom. Freedom will then give them insights and then consistently monitor where risk might be happening. Now, risk is risky business because once you know it, you're responsible for it, right? And so we don't always want to know the risks, either personally or professionally. And so the reason that companies are looking for risk now is because of regulatory pressure. So almost every one of our customers needs to report out either against the Modern Slavery Act or a German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, or in Australia, a Modern Slavery Act, or increasingly in Europe. Next year, there's going to be an EU Due Diligence Act. So the need for supply chain transparency and risk management has increased exponentially over the last few years, and it's not going away. And it's one of those spaces where the supply chain technology industry was found a little bit flat-footed because it never needed to understand anything beyond just the direct suppliers. But all of the regulations are requiring upstream risk analysis. And so that's really where Freedom entered the market. The reason we were looking at risk beyond tier one suppliers is because that's where the risk was. If you're trying to map child labor in your supply chain, it's very unlikely that it's your direct suppliers. And yet that's the mentality that most of us have. We think, well, I buy a phone from Apple, or I buy my car from Tesla, whatever it might be. And that's how it is. But there's this enormous supply chain. Both Tim Cook and Elon Musk are supply chain wizards. They can tell you that it's not the ideation of the product. It's the structure of the supply chain that makes the value of the product, right? Mm. And so all of that's held together, and it's actually quite valuable the way that these supply chains hold together. The problem is they don't quite have all of the optics needed. And those upstream suppliers that might not be working inside of your value set have now become a risk to your business.
Mm. It's a bit disappointing that a lot of the growth is being pushed by regulation, in all honesty. Do companies, if we took away the reg, would we be seeing progression in this space because companies also just see a business benefit? And I'm talking about companies which have got no ethics, all right? They just look at it and go, actually, they don't care. I don't know if those types of people exist. Got to be very careful, I suppose, how we say these things. But in general, companies that have been particularly shareholder driven, certainly for the last decades, haven't worried much about the externalities of the products and services that they create. They've never had to, because there's never been a recharge or a deduction from them. And we're seeing lots of examples of regulation forcing companies to care about the waste and the issues they create, particularly, let's say, carbon as one example. So if we took away regulations, do you think companies and C-suite are starting to go and be more proactive in ethical sourcing anyway, because there's a business value, or actually the regs are key to move this forward?
we're getting away from the operation of a business, and we're getting into the psychology of a human being, and I don't think that those two things can be separate. I have met with business leaders who cannot act upon this, but who desperately personally want to. If you want to call that a golden cage, there's lots of metaphors for it. But there's a great story about the civil rights movement here in the U.S. when Dr. Martin Luther King was going to President Johnson and trying to get him to pass a bill, and the president said, you know what, Martin, I've got all the responsibility, but none of the power as president, which arguably is an excuse. I've got all the responsibility, but none of the power. Congress has all the power. And as Dr. King was walking out of the White House in the West Wing, he turns to his colleague and says, "We've got to get that man some power." And I think that is a genius way of getting what you want to get done in the world. And it's very compassionate. It's very emotionally intelligent, which is, that guy's got a blocker. He may or may not. I don't know the man's motivations, but I know what is blocking him from acting on something that we want to happen. So we've got to, quote unquote, get him some power. And that's when the March on Selma happened, with the cameras. Those cameras pointed at the marchers is the power that the president needed, whether he wanted it or not, to move in the direction and bend the arc of the universe towards justice. So I tend to look at, we just need to get them some power. We just need to create the structure. I believe that most people do want to do good, but the structure that they're working in and the context they're working in doesn't necessarily allow for it. And that's why the marketplace is one of the greatest places to establish justice and create systems that operate with the values that we hold as human beings.
Yeah, I love that. We'll come on these questions in a second, but just to want to round off on this power. One of the ways to create power is to go and show the leadership team what their clients are thinking about their organizations.
Sure.
What they're thinking in terms of whether they're walking into the shops or they're going to the competitors, because this is an important perspective. Now, I like to think that me as a consumer, when I see an organization doing the wrong thing, I will bypass that organization and choose for someone else. And I think if there's reasonable substitutes, there's a chance I might do that. I'm certainly aware of the fact when I look at organizations like Tesla, which are outright trying to do something which is perceived as being a sustainably beneficial product, and it is so different, and it's marketed in such a beautifully way. I want to go and use that particular platform. Not very helpful in South Africa because we don't have them, but so are you seeing consumers in general of all walks of life making that shift to ethically sourced, products? Have you got brands that are actually, doing well in that space, and we've got evidence that the consumers are marching with their feet? That's a powerful story to get the C-suite to actually move on this.
When it comes to ethical, we're usually talking about justice issues, right? And there are no justice offsets you can buy. It's different than carbon. When we talk about people, there's no acceptable amount of child labor that exists in a supply chain, right? And yet it's in just about every supply chain. So there really does need to be a shift. The models that we've used to be able to create progress around environmental movement and sustainability, they don't necessarily pattern match when it comes to justice. So what is the thing that companies can improve upon? When I first started in this space and started looking at supply chains, which I'd never thought of before, but I started thinking about these like all the way back in 2007. I was thinking about what is something that everyone is connected to, that is something that they can participate in. It's very, very hard when you're thinking about justice issues when you're living in the Bay Area in San Francisco, right? Or justice issues that exist elsewhere. Obviously, justice issues are everywhere, but when you think about systemic injustice around the world that shows up as child labor and slavery, it seems quite far away, and yet supply chains are what connect us to it. And so that really got me thinking about how can we rally a movement around consumers around ethical buying. And it got me thinking about, how can I start bringing these consumers to businesses, just to let businesses know that this is real for them. And the first campaign we did was a consumer campaign where consumers just wrote companies. We created a platform. At the time, I was involved with a film that was in movie theaters, one of the biggest films on human trafficking. And so we used that film and all the media around it as a way to, have consumers write letters. Mm-hmm. And I remember I decided to write the first letter to see if the platform worked. And I wrote it to Steve Jobs. Why not? He was around at the time, and wrote a letter and said, Steve, my name is Justin, blah, blah, blah. We're talking about slavery in supply chains. Are you aware of this thing called cobalt in supply chains? It's mined out of DRC. There's got a lot of issues around it. Are you aware of it? And then sent it off, and of course forgot about it. But 4 hours later, I got an email back. It said, I had no idea. I'll look into it. Steve, with the footer sent from my iPhone, which I thought was clever. So that was cute. And of course, that was like the greatest email I ever got back ever. But you take, so that's 2007, okay? Last week or 2 weeks ago, Tim Cook announced that they're going to be using, by 2025, completely recycled cobalt. So it took that amount of time. Now here's how they're doing it. They're recycling the phones, which also recycling phones and taking iPhones and iPods, whatever they're selling off the market, is good for their business, right? It keeps their business moving. Obviously, they're good at it. But it also gives a way to be able to scrape out the cobalt and not reuse it. So now they've created a justice model and a business model that works. Mm. And here's what I'm not happy about, Colin. No one's talking about that. See, we can't have an ethical consumer movement until people everyone knows what perfect looks like, but people have a hard time celebrating what progress looks like. The media only picks up the bad stuff. That should have been a major story in terms of all of this, but instead we get all the finger pointing. So you're asking about an ethical consumer movement. Yeah, I believe so, but I don't believe it's going to be as dynamic, and it's got to be something where people start getting a bit more understanding about how things work. And when they see an announcement like that, which is profound, they celebrate it.
I agree. All right, let's go over. Thomas has asked a nice question here. You're going to answer this one live. I'm going to reword it ever so slightly. How do you make sure your data is accurate? Obviously you need the clients to trust this. They're going to take big decisions on it. We'll talk about the decisions you're hoping they'll take in a minute. The data has got to be accurate. This feels like a really difficult ask.
It is, and admittedly, it is as much an art as it is a science, and I know that isn't comforting. But here's our philosophy on that: risk doesn't sit still so that you can catch it. So our algorithms and our data and our processes need to constantly be improving, and they are. Our innovation curve is quite steep, but never perfect. Never perfect. The first challenge that we have, and this isn't us obfuscating responsibility, but the first challenge we have is we can't do anything without our customer giving us accurate data. And 80% of supply chain data is unstructured, which is code for a hot mess.
Yeah.
So that is the first hill to take. And I would say a lot of our work is helping our customers. Initially, we kind of set a high bar. It's like, here's the structure of your data. You've got to have it. If it's not in this structure, we're not taking it. And then we realized our market got really, really small because most people aren't there. And so we started coming towards them a little bit and saying, okay, well, we're going to help you structure your data and see things in your supply chain you've never seen before. And sometimes it's just mind-boggling to see how unstructured this data is. But as it starts to get structured and starts to hit our algorithms, we can start helping customers see things that they want, that they've never seen before. And so not only is the data hydration an ongoing process, the updating of our analysis and our algorithms is an updating process. And we are very excited and very proud, I should say, of the way that we've built our risk algorithm, because it's elegantly created to be able to remove bias and has weighting and all the rest of it. And it's still not done. We're going to be doing another update on it here pretty soon, just given the need for all the new information, because there is new information. When we built our algorithm, there wasn't a lot of reports around child labor, forced labor. There's an enormous amount of reports that are coming out now from really reputable sources that we have to be able to harvest. And so anyone who's working with us is going on a journey with us that we are going to continue to get better around our analysis and around the way that we cleanse data.
There was a question that came in before. I don't know if it was from a chap called Roy Irvine. I don't know if he's on the call. It was a great question. He highlighted that De Beers have introduced a ethical sourcing model using blockchain. And I guess the question off the back of it is, do you see blockchain as being a potential benefit in terms of what you're trying to do? I mean, the idea is if you can use cryptology to go and mark every single object in that supply chain, it becomes very easy to audit and assess where it's came from and the origins of it.
The answer is it depends. That's a great case study. Diamond mining, any kind of commodity mining, blockchain can play a huge role. But blockchain is just like any platform. Its value is based on the inputs that goes into it. You can create. It's just like creating. I could create a social network tomorrow, but it doesn't mean anything if anyone doesn't show up. Right? It's not a social network until there's something social happening on it. The same thing for blockchain. We actually, when we first started the company, we wrote our own white paper because it was in the salad days of tokenized economies and all the rest of it. And it actually did shape a lot of the way that we have set up our 10-year growth model in terms of our product. But we've realized that blockchain may come into play later down the road. But again, that's not the problems at massive scale. That's not the problems we need to solve right now. What we need to solve is issues with data. And we need to solve the ability to be able to find that data and put that into a system, whether that needs to be a system like blockchain or just the systems that we use. Right now, that's not the problem that we see. The problem that we see is being able to get that data from the sources. Just so you know, there's companies, and we rely on trade data. We rely on a lot of publicly available data or some not publicly available data that just doesn't get published. So there's countries in the world that are a black box. And so you have to use different types of tools to be able to find who owns what company and what's coming from where. Some countries just make that very difficult. And in that case, blockchain wouldn't have much of an impact.
I'm glad you said that because I do quite a lot of stuff with fintechs and in that startup economy, and it's blockchain. I hope Monica's not listening. I'm still not convinced, but anyway, that's for a different conversation. Joel, tell me. So I've learned a lot there about what you're doing, and I love it, to be honest. Joel, tell me more about why Standard Bank's got involved. I'm trying to understand. I mean, it looks great. I mean, I'm glad that you are involved, but where are you actually seeing this being something which is both profitable and beneficial for Standard Bank and equally so for your customer base? This is very non-banking what you're doing.
Thanks, Colin. There are a number of different ways where we see getting a lot of value out of it. So firstly, we've put the data through our own procurement team, and it's given us a lot of understanding of some of the risks available further down into our own supply chain. So it's good for us to then pass on a product like that onto our client base. We're also starting to think about how we start using it a bit differently in the bank. So how do we start looking at who we're actually doing business with and what potential risks it might come out of having that relationship? Not to say it's going to change it, but it changes the conversation that we start having with some of our clients. And it also helps create a little bit more transparency in their own operations. So imagine having information where you can share with the client, telling them about an nth tier supplier who could potentially create some sort of risk into reputational risk into their business. So we start seeing the application of both the downstream as to how it's not just touching us and our clients, but also potentially their suppliers and also people they might be doing business into. And I think from creating a network for these platform businesses to grow, you need to have that network of interconnected businesses supplying information into the system to create that rich data. And also ultimately, we can start holding each other accountable as to what we're doing. I think ultimately, if we start thinking about one of the good things with Freedom is it helps give the suppliers a rating. So you get a Freedom rating depending on how your practice is going or how your operations are going and the information you put into the platform. what we're starting to see is this also helps a lot of businesses on the continent who do not get your traditional ESG or sustainability rating. So we're helping expand the reach, if you will, of how far in we can start showing that even smaller businesses are actually doing good. They are sustainable and they should get the benefit by getting a rating in terms of giving them that sort of stamp in showcasing what they're doing. So there are a lot of different ways we can start looking at how it could help benefit us, and commercially down the road, how it could also help the likes of Freedom in our partnership. But most importantly, it's just creating that transparency and helping our clients and their clients get a better understanding of who they're doing business with.
Are your clients a bit confused when you're going to them and talking about, let's call this sourcing software as a service and pushing it through one hub, as opposed to how many basis rates you're going to charge them and the penalties for going over their overdraft limits? Because in brutal terms, this is very different what you're doing.
Yes, and I'm lucky to be part of an organization that has thought about how we can potentially help our clients differently. So we have what we call the traditional business of Standard Bank, which is, how can you help fund me or help my business grow? But we come from a very different perspective. We think about how can we add value over and above just the banking or the financial side. So ESG or sustainability is quite a huge and hot topic right now. And we found that a lot of our clients might know what they want to do. They might know where they want to get to, but they don't have their tools or solutions to help them get there. And ethical sourcing is one of them. They want to do good. They want to make sure that from a procurement perspective, they're sourcing things in an ethical manner, but they might not necessarily know where to start. So through One Hub, we have all these solutions and offerings which we can take to them in understanding what those needs are and help package the right set of solutions. So it's not just necessarily Freedom, but we can couple it with a couple of other solutions to help them better go along their sustainability journey. So in the beginning, it's a little bit difficult to come in front of clients and try to get that time and not offering banking solutions. But I think as One Hub, and as we get more and more out there into the market, it becomes an easier conversation to have.
No, I love it, actually. I think it's something which more banks should be doing. It's something where perhaps this is a little bit against the flow that's been reported in the newspapers for many years, ever since 2008, 2009, particularly. The trust that we have in banks is powerful. I know everyone goes around and say we don't trust banks. But if there's a bank using a product or a service and that believes in it, you can usually guarantee it's pretty safe. And providing that platform and they're very complex machines, banks. So using that platform of everything that you have to learn in the data sets to go and manage the day-to-day transactions and risk and reg of a bank, and turning that into beneficial products. And so I think it's a phenomenal model. So well played to, I guess, Sim and the team for actually running with that. But there is a caveat, Justin. I'm sure there is a caveat, and it sort of relates to Roy's question here. Is that this isn't free, is it? This isn't free advice from Standard Bank and a free software as a service solution. Can you give us some indication about the pricing on these types of things, how people get started on this?
Yeah, so it's an enterprise software platform. So we do annual subscriptions, and the way that we charge, we try to meet companies where they're at. Meaning, if you've got a company that has 100,000 suppliers, we have customers that have those and load that kind of data. That's a very different price than if you're operating with 2,500 suppliers, right? And so our pricing is very unit based. It's annual subscription. And it gives our customers a chance to, a number of our customers will come in and put, maybe a modest amount of their data on Freedom to see if they get the value, which we love that. We think that that's a great way to build trust and to build value over time. And we've seen customers increasingly up there, 60% of our customers increase or expand their contracts. And so, and that could be a business unit, right? It could be a multinational that just wants to do one country and then they can add more, or just one division and wants to do more. So it's really convertible that way. I think that we've also grown as a company in terms of the offerings that we provide. So initially we're called Freedom. So it kind of speaks to what we're about. And so initially it was about human rights, but now we're pulling in sanction data and we're about to pull in geopolitical data. The reason we're able to pull those in so easily and so economically is because once we've done all the hard work of bringing all of your data in, the opportunities and the economies of scale to do risk management is quite conservative, where the cost is at least. So the ability to see things at a very low cost and quite frankly, a lot quicker. Most of our competitors in this space derive their information, their first party data from questionnaires. And I just want to speak to that for a second. We're seeing a sea change in this space around the supply chain transparency space, a movement from audits and questionnaires to big data. And it's not a complete replacement, but it is something that I think that is worthy of note, that if you are relying on questionnaires or audits, first of all, audits are at best 60% accurate. They don't always come back with the information that you need. That has been proven by studies by McKinsey and Deloitte and others, that social audits are not as they're good in some situations, but they're not something you completely rely on. And questionnaires at best have a 30%, and I mean at best, a 30% response rate. And questionnaires also are looking backwards, meaning what have you done? So if something changes in your supplier's business the day after they send you the questionnaire, you won't know about it again for a year. The world doesn't work that way. And so the maturity of where the world's going to and relying on big data and technology to be able to solve these problems, we're just at the beginning of that. And I don't just mean freedom, I mean the whole space is really at the beginning of that, where businesses are starting to say, we've never bought supply chain transparency software before. I hear that literally every day. We've never bought one of these things. You're not replacing anything we have. So it takes a lot of education to help companies see this is what's going. You wouldn't be knocking on our door if you didn't need something. And so a lot of what we do is try to help explain not just the benefits, but just how they're going to be able to create workflows going forward, because most of these companies have to put out a report every year, whether it's to regulatory bodies or their investors, around what's going on in their supply chain.
Now, look, if you will take on these blue ocean products and services and challenges, then that's your own cross to bear to get people to understand what it does. Candice, you've got a great question. Let's see if you can promote you to actually ask it directly, because it's a long question. You are now apparently allowed to talk. Are you there, Candice?
I am, Colin. Thanks for the challenge. Justin, you've partially answered some of the question in your very last statement, because I think CDP has been quite public about how they are encouraging membership to do a supply chain reporting. And I know that there's been quite a big uptake globally for that. So I was interested to see whether that's actually helping. I know it's based on questionnaires and all the good things that you've just referred to, but I'm keen to understand whether there are other channels or other providers, because I think one of the challenges that we're facing is supply chains are super interlinked, and the sharing of data is super helpful to help combat human trafficking and slavery challenges. And Joel, yeah, if you could also maybe potentially comment on things that Standard Bank might be using in terms of data sharing around this. I think that the uniqueness of content across banking in South Africa can help combat a lot.
And Justin and Joel, before you start, just so you got context, Candice is from the London Stock Exchange Group and previously Refinitiv. So obviously, an organization highly interested in this topic and data in general, and, I guess assisting in the sort of movement that's been created here.
Yeah, and Candice, just so everyone understands, you're referring to the Carbon Disclosure Project, is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and so there you go. It's in the title, Carbon Disclosure. That is the opportunity and the challenge. How do we now? And it's difficult to disclose something if you don't actually even know it yet. And I think that is when we're talking about Scope 3 emissions, which is primarily tied to a company's supply chain. The ability to get information from your suppliers, or the activity of trying to get information from your suppliers in a time of inflation and at a time of a post-pandemic when supply chains have gone through their own reckoning, getting someone to then spend, I don't know, Candice, how many hours? 8 hours on a questionnaire that takes 5 people to answer it, getting the motivation behind that, and understanding what you're going to get for that, other than just a report and an opportunity to get a renewal on your contract, it's a tough sell. And I think this is a space that by no means we have cracked yet, but we are trying to find ways in which we can get, we can start to fill in the gaps, of which there are many, around carbon calculations for our customers. So 3 things that we're doing around that is we're using our technology to measure carbon intensity, meaning we can just take all of the information, the spend data we have, without ever talking to suppliers, and measure carbon intensity. Can you report on that? Probably not. There's not a lot of reports. You can report internally, but you're probably not going to report to CDP or anything around that. We can also do carbon factoring. So we can use the spend data and the industry data and able to get, if a customer's suppliers are loaded onto Freedom, immediately they will have their factored emissions. It's a very, I would say it's a simple calculation, and that's why a lot of sustainability professionals don't like it, because it's very, very high level, and yet it's what's used quite a bit. So that the minute you turn on Freedom, you will have that in terms of factored emissions. And then behind that, we also create a carbon calculator that suppliers can use to be able to determine their scope 1, scope 2, if they choose to do that. So there's several steps with different levels of accuracy that we can get to. And for us, we're just getting started. Again, we don't come to this with a sustainability lens. We come to this from a supply chain data lens, which is a very different perspective, in that we understand the challenges of creating incentives for suppliers to share very, very critical data. And it turns out we're a supplier, and we hate questionnaires like everyone else does. And we get lots of them because we work with very, very large companies. So I just think that entire space around how do we extract really important information from our supply chain, it's still an area that we need to start finding better ways to create incentives. And the reason that we work as a company with procurement professionals, procurement is a side of the business that no one ever thinks about. It's just like, you just get stuff done. To me, the revolution starts in procurement. They are the revolutionaries because they write the checks. And so I would, if someone's in charge of your renewal of your contract saying we need this information, you're far more incentivized to be able to provide that information, because it's going to grease the skids for the next renewal. And I think there is a lot of opportunity around that space. And that's why we always let people know, when we talk to our friends in sustainability sides of the business, we make it clear, hey, we really kind of sit on the supply chain procurement side of this. We're not as we're here to be able to provide information for the sustainability side of the business, but we do it through a supply chain procurement lens.
Very cool. Joel, do you want to add anything?
Not really. I think Justin covered most of it, but I think we're also limited in how much information we can actually share based on data privacy regulations, etc. But most of what Justin has said pretty much covers what I would say. The additional thing, I suppose, is how we start thinking about utilizing some of this information to enhance the reporting of the feedback we're giving into the client base, particularly around their supply chain, and how we make the product a little bit better at the end of the day to suit their needs.
I'm assuming that this is one of these sort of exponential multiplier, virtuous circle type formats, where for each client that comes on, you get a 1 point something times benefit, because you can cross-reference with others, and so that list goes on. So a key part is obviously accelerating getting these major organizations on. How do you get, and this is an earlier question, I'm just adapting it slightly or extending it, how do you get the Amazons of the world or the Shopifys of the world? And I pick those two deliberately because they're platforms as a service, and therefore, you know, you're talking about taking interest from first tier suppliers down to second tier suppliers. Now you've got platforms that arguably have got no interest or relationship with the suppliers in general. They're just providing this software and come and sell your product on this platform. A bit like Uber tries to say that they're not really employing staff. How do you get those guys interested?
Well, we've had several conversations with them. You know, obviously they're thinking the way that they're a retail organization, they think very differently than a manufacturing or even a services organization does about supply chain. But do keep in mind, maybe not Shopify, I'm not familiar with that, but Amazon does have its own supply chain, not only for its indirect spend, but also for products that they create. And so they do have a lens on this. They're just so big. It's very, very hard to get, you know, to get one idea going through there. I will say that I know companies like that are thinking about this and trying to find ways in which they can systematize this kind of transparency. I think when it gets real, and I'll just, you know, for us as a company, we're not afraid to share our ambitions. Like we want a rating alongside the stars and the number of reviews. Eventually, we believe that within 5 years, it's not just, you know, we talk about ethics and sustainability as being measurements of which no one knows what 0 to 100 means on those, that a normal buyer does, right? I think we're going to have a new measurement in the space, and it's going to be transparency. How much do you know about your supply chain and your business? There will be transparency ratings. We offer transparency ratings on our system, and we work with our customers to increase that. And I actually believe that transparency is how you get away from greenwashing, or my favorite new term, green wishing, because you're pulling data into the system. You're providing a level of third-party empiricism to goals that you're not even going to be around to hit because they're 15 years out. So the data is what makes it, especially when it's third party. The data is what makes it hold together and says we're moving towards a goal. And I think if you continue to create goals that you're not going to be around for, not responsible for, people aren't dumb. Like we just kind of ignore it. And it's not as big of a deal as your marketing team might think it is. You need to start putting some empiricism behind your goals. And yes, you're not going to get, look what happened to Apple. That was not a big enough story. But to me, that's a massive story. And to anyone who truly cares about ethical procurement, a massive story, because they've been working on it clearly since I sent my email. I'm kidding. So this is something that this is something that we need to start changing the way that we think about it. And transparency is how you do that.
So I love transparency. And I'm now going to take a sort of 180. I don't know how many competitors are in this space. I'm assuming there's a few. Are there? There are. Yeah. And this is one of those things where you need to be running as a business and you are competitive, but there must be huge benefits from cooperating with your competitors in this space. How are you sort of managing and dealing with that? Because it must be a really interesting conundrum for you and your competitor peer groups.
It is, and I actually love it. And there's some competitors who, you know, we've got competitors that are more like dogs, and some competitors are cats. Cats don't want anything to do with you, and they just kind of walk off, and you need them more than they need you. But there's some competitors that are more like puppies, that we all kind of need each other, right? And those are the ones that we would say we're in co-opetition with, and our success is tied together. And there's a number of third-party data platforms that we get to work with. You know, we're in business with, you know, consulting firms and that are also have solutions around what we do. It's kind of crazy when you've got, you know, 250,000 employees and no one knows what anyone's doing. It's like, do you know we're a customer and a partner? And, you know, we're just a small startup in their ecosystem. So I think as a company our size, partnerships can be just daunting, especially with large companies. It's exciting. We've worked with SAP. We've worked with some of the biggest companies in the world. Very exciting. Love going to the conferences, all the rest of it, but you can get lost very quickly. I think for us, where we're gravitating towards is the companies that are kind of in our space, have been around about the same amount of time or a little bit longer, that are solving a different side of the problem. There could be a company that's really solving for the interrogation and entity matching. We could really use that and find ways in which we can partner with that. And as we start to bring that to the market and say, you know what, there is no one solution, but there might be ways in which a couple of these work together, and we're going to make this easy for you, because no one likes buying multiple pieces of software. But if we can get them to work together, and that's a lot of what Joel and I are trying to do at Standard Bank, is how can we just make this easier for customers where they just come on with a single sign-on and get what they need? That's really what the market needs. I have no question that the market is heating up around wanting supply chain transparency. They just don't want more friction. No one wants more friction. No one wants more software. No one's asking for more software. So how do we make it easier for them? And partnerships is one way to do that.
You must compete for the same resources. I don't know how many resources, maybe give us an indication that you have on average as you're growing and scaling and going global, but I guess you compete from the same sources. A lot of major SaaS players are. I mean, you mentioned SAP. I mean, that might be one example. Others that work in supply chain management. Are you finding that your purpose and the um, is a helper or a hinderer in terms of getting top quality talent?
Oh, do we as a small startup have challenge getting talent?
Yeah, I suppose that's a much. But we should swap places. That was a better way to ask the question.
Yeah. Look, it obviously the labor market changes quite drastically. It certainly has this year. It's very hard a couple of years ago, but I can speak to the people that are on our team are hungry. They know what it means to be in a growing, they know what it means to grow a company, and very passionate about the things that we're trying to solve. And it's rare that people can, the kind of people that we have on our team, both care about a mission and also care about making money. And both things can be true at the same time. We want to grow a business. We want to grow a big business. And we know that in growing our business, we're helping achieve our mission, because our mission is to make supply chains transparent. Because once it's transparent, problems start to solve themselves, because problems can't hide. And I think that that's, to have a team that gets that, that's very, very rare. So we're very fortunate to have the team that we have. We're also, we're all over the world, right? So we're a completely remote team. We don't have a headquarters. You're looking, well, I've got the screen, but you're looking at, it's not very impressive. So, you know, we're very scrappy in the way that we do this, but I think that's also really difficult to find remote teams that are in line with your values, in line with your passion, and, you know, really want to make something grow.
How difficult are you finding it? So, if we're going back to the start now, I mean, your background is fascinating, and I don't have all of the years filled in, but I do know that you've been in a band, you've been the director of a movie, you've authored a book, and these are all incredible endeavors. But they're and they're not individualistic; they're very artistic endeavors.
Yeah.
And now you're the CEO founder of a software as a service, you know, with technologists in a company environment dealing with large organizations with all their structures. Was this a major shift? And I'm trying to, you know, was it a major shift for you? What gave you the confidence to do it? And what have you kind of learned on the journey in terms of whether this is really hard or really easy to make that shift?
Well, my confidence is directly tied to my imposter syndrome. So what I don't know is what allows me to walk into spaces that I don't think I necessarily would belong in. But I've been very privileged to get to be in rooms that I would never expect to be in. I think what it's taught me, getting to, you know, I did start off in the music industry, and then I found myself in the film industry, and then I found myself in the advocacy nonprofit world, and then I found myself in the software world. The thing that the line that ties all that together is, I love making things. I love sharing those things. And I love seeing people get value out of those things. So whether it's a song or a movie or software or whatever that is, they all hold true to me. What gets me excited is to make something that makes other people's lives more meaningful in a way that I don't have to push. And so software can do that. Enterprise software, a little bit tougher, but the reality is that we know, and what we share with our customers like Oshkosh and our dear friend Alec at Oshkosh, like, we get so excited talking to them because they're taking their huge company that's making their whole mission is to protect people, and they brought that mission. They make, you know, they make fire engines and all kinds of stuff. Their mission is now tied to, we can use our supply chain to protect people. Like, nothing gets me more, that's as exciting as, you know, making a movie or going to a premiere or actually, it's not quite as exciting, because applause is awesome. I don't get as much applause anymore. That's pretty awesome. I miss that. But it is very exciting to see someone get value like that. And to me, that from where I'm sitting, it all makes perfect sense.
Well, you just mentioned, was it Alex Streeter there, was it?
Yes.
Let's, Alec, do you want to talk and give your observation? We've only got 1 minute left, so it's going to have to be very, very short. I'm allowing you to talk.
That's the closer you want.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can.
We got you.
All right. Yeah. No, we've been with Freedom for quite some time. And the great thing is about Justin and his team is that they're very agile. We come with ideas, we talk about them, we develop them together. And, one of them was kind of our supplier onboarding process. And we were able to develop a link where when suppliers want to join our company, they fill out the SAQ, they fill out some information about their company so we can understand kind of their supply chain and the risk that they pose to our company if we decide to do business with them. So
Awesome.
yeah, no, Freedom and Justin have just been absolutely stellar to work with. And with this ever evolving challenge, we need that flexibility to adjust with our growth.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. And you did a very good job. That was just about allowing us to close on time. Justin, thank you very much for joining us. Joel, anything you want to say about how people get in contact with you to learn more?
Thanks, Colin. They can do it through my LinkedIn connection, or they could just Google One Hub Standard Bank, and we'll be able to help them learn more about Freedom and also how we can help them along their sustainability journey.
Wonderful. And to Umfo, sorry we didn't get to your all of your questions, but anyone that's still got questions, you're welcome to email me. You've all got my email details from the invites. And I just want to say thank you very much for everyone that's attending. Hopefully we will create a recording of this and distribute it again. If you get it and you enjoyed it and you want to share it, you want to pass it on to your friends in sourcing and procurement, my sense is you're doing a good thing. So until you get that recording, until the next event with Standard Bank, thank you very much. Have an awesome evening and a fantastic week, and indeed a great year. With that, bye-bye.
Thank you.